So welcome everybody that's joining on this webinar today. So nice to see you all, and thanks for joining today's session, which is called Data Curation, Fueling the Future of Responsible AI. We're just going to get started in about 1 minute, and then we'll kick off proceedings. My name's Andrew Turner. Nice to see you all today, and thanks for coming to this session. There's a bit of housekeeping while we're waiting. We're recording this session today, and we will be publishing it on YouTube afterwards on our Praxi channel. We'll also be probably creating some shorts out of it as well, which probably be some good quotes out of the back of today's panel guests. We're also going to be we're using Zoom webinar today. So if anybody has any chat or questions, if you post them in the Q&A box at the bottom. In terms of any kind of logistical issues, then please let us know in the chat. Anna from our team's kindly acts as moderator, so she'll moderate the questions as we get into the detail of the actual session. So I suppose to start off with, for people who've actually just joined us, do you want to share where you actually joined us from? I'm actually in London, so I'll be the first one to share. Anybody else want to share? We've got Sheila from San Francisco. Anybody else going to share where they're joining us from today? Let's see how global we are in this with today's webinar. Boston, hi Jennifer, nice to see you. Seattle, hi Yemen. Tucson, Arizona. New Hampshire, Southwest Coast, Palo Alto. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of variety here. Nobody in Asia yet. Our panel members are mainly in Europe, I think, this week, but we also have some representation on the West Coast as well. So let's get into it. Let me just find the presentation. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as I said today, thank you for joining today's session. Today, 1st of October, start of a new quarter, and a good way to finish the year. We have been working on quite a lot of stuff at Praxi, and also with our friends at Amazon, AWS. And it's a pleasure to jointly talk about an interesting topic today called data curation, and also the topic of responsible AI. And we're going to talk with a series of experts in this space about their perspectives on it and what's important for the future. So in terms of today, as I said, I'm the host. My name's Andrew Turner. I'm the General Manager and Advisory Board Chair of Praxi. We're a tech company, startup based in Palo Alto, operating globally. And we'll cover a bit more about what we're doing in the Praxi space as we close today's session. And then joining us today, we've got an esteemed panel. Just firstly to introduce Mr. Roberto Maranca. Roberto, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone.
Where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm joining you from Paris. So I'm on a business trip, and you caught me here.
Okay. Cool. And the internet works over there. That's good.
Yes, now it does.
So, Roberto, thanks for joining. So, I mean, as a quick intro, what's your role? Could you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. So my role in Schneider Electric as the energy management data officer. So basically, I look after one of the business units. Our business unit that is dedicated to all the manufacturing all the equipment to manage electricity and transfer electricity and make electricity digital. So my role is basically help the business to be good at data so that they can fulfill their ambitions, and especially around being more sustainable and having our efforts and investment in R&D really to come to the market and really innovate, and having basically been making sure that we satisfy customers.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining today. That's great. Sounds like a busy job. Busy role.
A bit.
Okay, so thanks Roberto for joining today, and we'll get into the kind of questions as we step through this. So secondly, John Hammond, thank you for joining from Amazon Web Services. How are you today?
I'm not too bad, thank you. I am I'd love to say it was sunny London, but it is absolutely raining cats and dogs outside at the moment. So, but yeah, that is the beauty I get of living in this lovely temperate place in the world.
I can hear the meows and the woofs in the background. Yeah, thanks for joining. So, what's your role within AWS? I know we've spoken before, but maybe for the audience, could you explain what kind of you get up into that in that kind of slightly large tech company that we all know about?
Yeah, definitely. So John Hammond, I've been with Amazon Web Services for coming up to 4 years. So initially joined 4 years ago to run the compute business for the UK, then ran the compute business for all of Europe, and I now lead the specialist team for the UK, UK and Ireland, I should say. And what is that? Effectively, if you all of our specialist resources, so that's the dedicated technical resources and dedicated sales resources across the whole of our business, roll up into me. So that includes all of AI/ML, all of data, core computing, enterprise applications, modernization, and we work with customers on the hardest, prickliest, most interesting technical challenges that we can find, which is exactly what I enjoy doing.
Cool. Working on all the hard stuff. Yeah. Okay. Sounds busy. Thanks for joining. So nextly, Maxwell Rebo from Straylight. Nice to see you on the panel today. And where are you joining us from today?
Hey, great to be here. Also from sunny, balmy London.
Okay. And what could you explain what you're doing at Straylight, if that's possible, just as a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So co-founder, CEO at Straylight. We mainly focus on automating a lot of compliance workflows. So analysts, risk analysts, and that sort of thing. I lead product research. Anyone who's ever been a founder knows you kind of do a little bit of everything. So developing a lot of core IP and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Cool. Thank you for joining. And last but not least, Mr. Arn, Andrew Arn, CEO and co-founder of Praxi. Andrew, could you do a bit of an intro as well to finish off the panel?
Hi, happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me to this esteemed group. Started the company in about late 2018, really to solve the curation problem, which we'll talk about today. Worked at NYC Euronext for many years and Hitachi Vantara, which was formerly Waterline Data, as well as Cloudera. So had a good range of experience with big enterprises and startups, and was really excited to start the company to focus on automated curation, and happy that it ended up here at this webinar eventually. So we should get on with it. Thank you very much.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Andrew. So yeah, to take us through into the agenda for today's session. So we're going to jump straight into a panel discussion after a couple of seconds. Then we're going to actually open the floor for some live Q&A. So as I mentioned right at the beginning, as people were joining the webinar, if anybody has any questions, we've kindly got Anna from our team who's going to be act as moderator for questions that you submit through the Q&A panel, which should be at the bottom of your screens. If you've got any logistical issues, please share in the chat, and we'll address those. And then we're going to just finish off with a bit of an announcement about some collaboration we'll be doing with AWS, which is pretty exciting. And then just wrap up and explain some of the logistics about what we're doing in the future. So I suppose to get into the panel, and I suppose as a kind of an opening gambit on that, one of the things that I wanted to say was it's quite good. I was just doing some research on this stuff before we start today's session. And you probably know some of this stuff. I think some of you guys are quite good on computer history. But it's quite interesting. 1947, when Alan Turing actually started, predicting the kind of computer intelligence, which we now morph into this kind of concept of artificial intelligence. And then, obviously, Deep Blue took 50 years for IBM to release that in 1997, and now we are in 2024. And with this whole, I call the kind of surfs up, the kind of generative AI tsunami that's been going on in the last 18 months. We're now right in the thick of that. So we thought that bringing this topic to the fore as a discussion was pretty timely. And what I found quite interesting is actually talking to each of the panel members we got on today before we had this webinar today. It's been really quite enlightening, and there's been kind of I think a good realization. It's worth having that debate about what's going on in the world and what the people need to think about if they're embarking on this organizational transformation. And everybody wants to get involved in AI, but actually, what are the foundational things you need to do to get in a really good place with AI and get the value out of that? But an interesting history you know, it's like we're nearly 100 years in already, at least 80 years in already. So yeah, just to kick off then, just in terms of questions, to kick things off, I was going to go to Roberto first. We're going to go to Paris, London calling Paris.
Let's pretend I'm surprised.
Yeah, you got to answer the question in French. Yeah, you know, from your perspective, you know, why is data curation? And I suppose talking about, you know, what's your understanding of what data curation is? Why do you think it is important to responsible AI? You know, what's the connection from your perspective? You're obviously in an operational role. You're looking at it through that lens. Any perspectives on that you can kick off the conversation on?
Okay, so just to put people at ease that this is not a deep fake, I'm going to connect two things that the deep fake will never connect. I'll connect Latin and engineering. All right, so I will back to the root of the word curation, which is curare, so it means to take care. I think it's important that we think about this concept of care, because when we look at now more of AI as a system, as a, you know, from a system theory point of view, you give an input, you have some process and you get an output. I think care is important because the difference between something that is, I know what it does, I know what it's going to do, I know, and I can responsibly say, I know what this system is outputting, is predicated on good care. Now, if you want to look more from an engineering point of view, we can say, oh, this is an engine, and the engine, to maintain nominal performance of the engine, we need to take care in the fuel composition, in the air composition, the maintenance has been done, the lubrication and so on. I mean, we can go in all kind of a direction, but the reality is that data is a fundamental component of the functioning of our AI systems. So I need to take care of what data will go into the AI system, not only at a point in space, but also on a point in time. And so for me, it's the key to guarantee the safety, the resilience, and the good functioning and the performance of what is effectively is an important product for us to, you know, manage decisions or help people to make decisions. So in a minute, that's what I would say.
Okay, I love the point you've actually, you know, obviously segued to your own language as well, with you being Italian, I think, origin. I love that. Thank you for that. A bit of culture, we add into this. Right,
that's why we know there's not a deep fake, right? So we don't.
So just switching to Andrew Arms, just to get another perspective on this. What's your perspective? I know that obviously from a regulatory industry point of view, you've kind of been in the thick of it before. What's your perspective? Any thoughts?
I'm sorry, but can I say that we are an incredibly regulated industry as well? I mean, manufacturing. Have you heard about battery regulation, waste regulation, packaging regulation, CSRDs? Everyone is regulated these days. Just a point that we open and close, right? So we can put it there just for the sake of the audience. Sorry, Andrew.
Oh, not at all. Just to piggyback on what some of Roberta had mentioned, you know, one of the things that makes it really critical for responsible systems is really an older thought, like the notion of chain of custody. You know, like a physical chain of custody. You know, data moves through various stages, and when something happens, law case, or you get put in front of the Department of Justice, you know, you need to pull on that thread and you need the chain of custody. But really, it's more than just something that looks backwards. It's something that you have to establish to maintain veracity, to maintain legitimacy. Where did you get this source? And this is always been a problem, but it's even more of a problem with generative AI, right? Like there's a lot of things that can happen where things can fall through the cracks. So that's one of the critical aspects where good curation, good classification really helps. So you know authoritatively where it came from, what's inside of these documents, and maybe where the origin of that data came from. So these things, while it may not be at the forefront, are actually really critical to making sure that the outcomes you want are actually usable and trustworthy and authoritative, so that you can build the rest of your, you know, data stack on top of it and all your analytics.
Okay, that's cool. No, thank you for that. I mean, just I suppose building on that, I mean, you know, when people, there's all these kind of other adjectives that you have, you know, you've got curation, you've got quality, you've got all these different, you've got data and then blah, data and then blah. in terms of quality, data quality, I mean, how does that relate to data curation? Any perspectives on that, Roberto, before we kind of pass it around the panel?
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this. But if you step away for 1 second on the data and blah, we can say that a data quality issue, effectively macro, is a deviation between what is in reality, what is that thing in reality, and what you're having that thing represented digitally, right? That's what it is. At the end of the day, is the deviation between what it should be and what is what you're having in your systems. So, and that's fundamentally an issue when you are trying to have an AI model, then an intelligence to make a decision. Because if the decision is based on something that was actually not fresh in time, or not valid, or not exactly stipulated on the right reference, the decision might be deviated from what it should be. So the challenges are really, how do I maintain my representation, the digital representation, in sync with reality? That's always been my biggest challenge, because I always said that of the data programs we are having, if you don't have a recipe for the maintenance and the alignment and the taming the change, because the world changes all the time. If you don't have the recipe, sometimes you're much better off not even starting doing data, because you're going to be ending a bit of a hurt. So I think the challenge that is translating into is, I can't scale because I don't know what's out there. I can't fix, or I can't expand my model in all the places I should be, because I don't know what's out there. I can't keep it in sync, and I'm not resilient. So at a certain point in time, whatever I'm having out of the model from a relevance point of view is not going to be relevant anymore, right? So that if you think about in one word, how do I manage change? That's a bigger challenge I have. With change with a big C.
I mean, I suppose the reason why I mentioned quality, because if you depends how deep people are in the audience in this topic, but there's lots of different. It's quite a kind of a jigsaw puzzle, yeah. And people usually associate data quality as input into a model, but then also, to my mind, curation as a process about making sure you've got the right quality and the right relevant data that goes into the model. Any thoughts on this from your perspective, Andrew, before we move on to some stuff from John and Maxwell?
Yeah, I mean, you could also substitute data quality to relevance, and that really addresses the points that Roberto made about freshness. If you don't have enough scope, if you're not actually getting all the data you could get, then really, the results of your analytics are not going to be accurate, right? You're overfitting, underfitting. If you have duplicate data that you just don't know about, then, you're skewing your results before you even start. So sometimes, that could be more detrimental. This is particularly important in areas where you really depend on machine learning to do kind of a lot of grunt work, like pharmaceutical research. If you don't get the data right there, then, you could spend quite a vast amount of resources going down the wrong path. And so, I'm sure that Maxwell and John have some thoughts around this, because they probably deal with this every day.
Well, yeah, no, thanks for that, Andrew. I mean, I think, switching to John, I mean, in terms of, obviously with the remit you've got within AWS, you're probably traversing, I presume, multiple industries. Yeah. Obviously, and, if you're talking to a C-level exec, they want to grab this nettle called innovation. They want to innovate and, create new business models, et cetera, et cetera. How are you seeing that kind of, how do they get from where they are today in that, position A to position B, and where does data curation fit in that? Any thoughts on that as a pathway?
Definitely. So it's really interesting. I've lived through the world of IT and data for quite some time. So if I think back to, I think history is a really interesting thing to look where this goes. So if you look back a while back, 10, 15 years, everyone decided to have this new concept of these data lakes that were going to turn up. And if everyone worked in tech, everyone was building a data lake. It was just, and I don't think people quite knew why they were building these data lakes. They built the data lakes, and then the kind of data lakes turned into, there was a customer we worked with, a very large UK bank, that basically said, we don't have data lakes, we have data swamps. So these swamps of data was kind of it was around, no one quite knew what it was. You kind of tried to stay away from it. And then what I find to be it's really interesting how kind of the natural world imitates IT, or IT imitates the natural world, whichever way. I think what's what's happened over time is all those data lakes have kind of almost like been pushed further and further and further down. And then people start talking about this expression that the data is the new oil. You know, we heard it repeatedly, and it was kind of going on for quite some time. And where AI fits in, it may sound like a weird way, but where AI for me starts to fit into this is AI a relatively simplistic algorithm. So the transformer is not a particularly complex algorithm of what's come out of it. And it's almost like we've invented the combustion engine that suddenly starts taking all of that oil, so those data lakes, those data sources being pushed deep underground, have suddenly kind of turned into oil that can be processed in useful ways by these relatively kind of standard, very large scale, but standard AI models. Where do I think data curation comes into this? Yeah, if you look at the process of oil refining, so stuff that comes out of the ground, the black gold that kind of starts spurting out. At first, it's not really that usable. It's kind of very generic. It's not in the right bits. There's no effectively finessing down to what it comes from. I think it's so important that we need to take that data and we need to treat it in for what it's needed for. Like, how do we have the specific bits? How do we know it's the quality that's needed? How do we know it's the security that's needed? And more than that, how do we know we're not training it with things we shouldn't? And I think it's so important if you think of this data life cycle running through. One of definitely the things that we've seen before is just as people get into the AI revolution that we're hopefully helping push forward, just the things around data are ever more key. How do we make sure that what we're training things with is what it should be trained with? And how do we not just kind of forget the 20, 30 years of good quality computer science, security, all of this stuff? And how do we make sure we keep it? And that's why for me, data curation, without it, the whole thing doesn't spin. It's absolutely key to everything we do, both in terms of segmentation of the data, the quality around it, the life cycling. Much akin to the way that I'd say oil refineries are just as important to oil as actually the black stuff that's in the ground.
Great analogies. I was actually going to use when you were talking about history, I was thinking about Stephenson's rocket. Then I was thinking it's like a rocket ship, all this data flowing through those pipes. Maxwell, welcome to the panel. Any perspectives from your side? I know you've done a lot of stuff in. I know you. I mean, part of things. I recall when we spoke about it before that I think you created one of the biggest AI groups in New York. I think a while ago. Is that right? It was like the fastest growing AI group in the whole world, nearly. Is that right?
There was a while there, a few months, where it was the largest AI focused regular group on the East Coast US.
On the East Coast, okay.
Right. Yeah, there's a slightly bigger one out in the Bay Area, but we were right on the heels. But yeah, back in 2017 or so, co-created New York AI, which was co-sponsored by IBM and Barclays and a few others. Really great group, and it's still running to this day, although a little bit smaller than it used to be. But no, I think everyone's raised some really good points about the curation process. One sort of tidbit that I would add to that is, when I say we, I really come refer to broader team over at Straylight. But the message we've really been trying to get out to people when we talk about this stuff is less can be more, right? It'd be too broad to say less is more because, well, sometimes more is just more. But we've been really trying to communicate this because part of the challenge that you have is a lot of folks have been more or less conditioned to believe that you have to have terabytes and terabytes of data to start doing anything interesting, right? Or anything even remotely useful. And certainly sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes you do see that impetus for just absolutely massive volumes. But a lot of the time, that diversity of data, right, and the veracity of data, back to what Roberto was talking about, that is really, really critical. Because what ends up happening a lot of the time is, at the end of a successful project, we find that a lot of teams come to realize that they can actually see much more complex behaviors, right? They can automate much more complex tasks from these systems with relatively small, or let's say moderate amounts of data than they would have ever believed at the beginning of the project. So I think that's really the big message that I would kind of continue to hammer on for probably will keep doing so for a while, is just a lot of times less is more, but you've got to have that curation process in place that that kind of creates those pipelines to what John was talking about.
And following on from that, Maxwell, I suppose the question would be is about, this thing about bias, and the context of diversity of data. I know you talked about you started going out that kind of the multi-V model, I suppose. Any concepts on that? I mean, obviously, if you've been right in the thick of it, creating AI models, et cetera, et cetera. Any thoughts on data bias and any observations of that when you've been traversing these different industries?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest industries, the team and certainly the company itself, we've done a lot at Straylight with banking, right, and a bit with insurance as well, and certainly a little bit with healthcare now. So we're dealing some heavily regulated industries to the earlier point that was made. But the biggest thing that we see, continuously when we talk about the bias issue is a lot of times it's actually overstated. That might sound a bit surprising, like, huh? What are we talking about here? Naturally, there's a lot of fear around it, right? Because of course, every so often you see something pop up in the news, some group messed up, right? And they're probably facing fines or other issues, right? That's scary, right? And dealing with regulators and all that can be very, very challenging. But a lot of times what we find is that the bias issue really only shows up strongly in some domains, right? And particularly when you're talking about customer data, you're talking about something that makes decisions that really affects individuals, right? That's obviously the most sensitive and the most the most kind of volatile in a sense. But actually, bias as it relates to other types of data that are more innocuous in terms of their outcomes, that can actually be itself a signal that can be useful and sometimes even monetized. So a simple example, we found in a cybersecurity use case, we found that a lot of their previously dark data they had sort of surfaced and were able to now use, it was biased in the sense that it only applied to certain types of analysts, right? There was really kind of a demographic segment within that it was telling a story about. And they said, oh, well, we need to go get other data that covers the other analysts. Well, turns out, actually, previously, that segment was pretty well understudied, okay? But actually, that bias, quote unquote, really told them something really useful about what was going on with that type of analyst, right? And so that's the main thing I would highlight there is it's not always as bad as it's made out to be. Sometimes can actually be slightly useful.
I mean, the reason I mention it is because obviously, if you look at the responsible AI, the whole practice of developing it within those contexts, it's about ethical, safe use for people and society. That kind of dimension of fairness and transparency, obviously security and being inclusive. So that's why I wanted to try and raise that point around bias, because sometimes it can be handled in the right way, but it also can be the danger is it's handled in the inappropriate way. Any thoughts on that from your side, John? I mean, obviously, you're like, I suppose, like Maxwell, you're traversing multiple industries in the role that you do.
Yeah, I think it's so key with data. There's the challenge you have, like you can see what's happened historically when you look at mortgage rates or mortgage approval rates within the US. Well, so you can see the bias when you look at some of the housing developments from Fannie Mac and Freddie Mae, this go back quite some time, but you look effectively, there was inherent racism in what was being done, because what they were doing at the time is they were actually saying, well, we're just going to look at the socioeconomic side of things, and poorer areas we're not going to fund, richer areas we're going to fund. And the problem with that is underneath there was an inherent bias to effectively the people that lived in those different areas. So it ended up with a perspective where effectively Black neighborhoods weren't being funded for developments and white neighborhoods were. And I think it's really important as you look at data to try and understand almost the inherent biases which can exist within that data, and to try and explore the outcome and the changes that it can make. And I think, especially when we look at some of these large scale, the decisions that are increasingly being made by AI and trained networks, I think there's ever more imperatives on the people that are doing it to be able to explain why the data was chosen, where it is, how fresh it is, how we're going to do it. Like that understanding of it before, I think is going to become ever more key. You know, if we look at how the privacy implications come in around some of this, it's absolutely key.
Yeah, and one stat that we've been using consistently that we've found as well is that the problem's getting bigger. So, you know, you got, you know, what's the projection? It's 175 zettabytes. So that you've probably got a bigger number, John. I don't know if you've got a number as well, Maxwell, but it probably changes every week. But, you know, my understanding is 175 zettabytes by 2025, over 80% is unstructured. So, you know, you've got a huge, you know, growing mountain of data. How do you grab your arms around it? And I suppose, you know, our hypothesis is you can't do that manually. It's just, you know, it's gone past that point. So, you know, when you switch into the topic about automation, I suppose I wanted to kind of like get some thoughts from you, Andrew, Mr. Rahn, about what, you know, what are you seeing in terms of automation as a kind of a leg up for this whole data curation problem as well? Any thoughts on that?
Slightly different take or a variation on that, which is, you know, everybody's concerned with the results, right? Like there's these KPIs and metrics, but when you're dealing with this amount of scale and complexity, you can't bolt on compliance and governance at the end of a process, right? It has to be incorporated into the whole pipeline, right? And it really does start, and mentioned this earlier today, so apologies if I'm repeating myself. It really does start at the beginning, right? As you're classifying, as you're like labeling this data, the better job that's done then will yield just huge amounts of benefits later. In fact, what happens is the resolution of the data, because it's summarized and aggregated, you can't ever get back to that higher level of resolution that you started with. So you really need to weed out the things that you don't care about, that you don't want, and you really need to make sure that the data is relevant and as complete as you can get it in the beginning, and then you're just going to have a better output. It's just like painting. Like 90% of painting is prep. Well, that kind of follows through with a lot of things like cooking and everything else, as well as analytic work, right? You really need to start off with like the right stuff, the right ingredients, right? And this is really the answer for the garbage in, garbage out problem, right? Like it starts with the right data, right? That's my 2 cents there. Yeah, I could talk for hours on this, so I'll stop there.
I know, Maxwell, you mentioned automation with the stuff, some of the use cases that you're working on. What's your perspective on that? Is it kind of like it's a foundational item? It's just you can't get away from not looking at. You can't automate everything, but how do you intelligently automate? Is that what your perspective is as well?
Absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing is, you know, the unit economics of data curation itself, right? Any instantiation that might be. We're talking about orders of magnitude differences in efficiency that can be had, and I emphasize "can" there because, again, you know, it does come down to the ability to realize it. Really comes down to, I think, kind of riffing on what Andrew was saying, right? Having that kind of governance and that process, that governance structure and that process in place, that really has to be there from the beginning, and that's when we're seeing really, really strong results coming out of. Layering in more automation and just kind of removing all that tedious stuff.
Yeah, power to the automation. Roberto, I know you just put a little messaging in the chat. You said about shift left. What's your view of shift left then? What's that little tidbit that you've put in there? A little sound.
If there is something that having worked in financial services taught me, is that when you talk about regulation, or in general when you talk about trust, right? Because the regulators is there to, you know, make sure you do the right thing, but you doesn't mean that the customer should have worse data. So if you want to guarantee something, then that compliance, that trust, that resilience has to be built in the outcome, has to be built in the pipeline. And the only way to do that, you need to shift left, meaning that when you think about something that needs to be delivered, everything has to be done more or less at the design stage. So you need to design for better quality, you need to design for responsibility, you need to design for whatever is to be part of your outcome. Otherwise, you're never going to achieve that at the end point of consumption. That's a key. That was my shift left thing. So instead of remembering about data when you actually go in testing and the data is not good, you should have designed for that.
I thought there was that thing called the 11th hour strategy when when you get to the end and it's all wrong.
Yeah, sure. And
or is it called the rework strategy?
and every project becomes agile at the end, right?
No, yeah, I like waterfall. I think we should all go back to waterfall, or a water scrum fall, as we used to call it in Telefonica. Okay, so moving on to a kind of, I suppose, a topic actually that you picked up, John, was about privacy. Obviously, depending what type of blasphemy. Thank you, Eugene. We obviously got some waterfall fans in the audience. Hi, Eugene. Or Scrum fans, maybe. John, in terms of privacy, obviously, I know that we talked about the size and the kind of the velocity of data. What are you seeing in terms of privacy and security? Then are you seeing that still a hot topic? Is that growing in relevance, in importance? It's it's an investment item that people are kind of saying it's a must do in their prioritization.
And I'll be honest, one thing on the question before, I think the automation side is super interesting. I think what has surprised me more than anything is the self-reflectivity or introspection capabilities that LLMs come with. And I think the ability, what has really genuinely surprised me is how good AI can be at rating the quality of responses from AI, which is super interesting, which is what actually makes this whole field so interesting. Because I think without that, a lot of this wouldn't work. Without the ability to automate these things and do it at scale, it just couldn't happen. And I think that's the same with the privacy and the security side of things. One of the big there's a number of challenges that sit within this. One of the key things for people looking for the world of AI that we find is, so you have an LLM, so you have Claude, or you have Mistral, or you have one of the other ones that are out there, or Llama 3.2 or Quern, whichever one's coming to. And you kind of have choices as you want to make that special for your company. The reality is, if you're just going to ship, there's a fantastic meme that has the Scooby-Doo face with just ChatGPT sitting behind these apps. In the end of the day, if you're shipping something and you're basically just shipping an LLM with a slightly custom prompt, I don't think it's a huge amount of value that I'm completely transparent with. All of the value in AI/ML comes with the data that you add into it. That is just the reality of the whole thing. And so, ideally, what you're doing is you're taking advantage of these large model providers that are spending very large amounts of money to invest to train it, and then you're effectively supplementing all of that data either with a RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. So you're inserting it into the prompt, or alternatively, you're fine-tuning that LLM, and you're depending on what your use case sits around it. One of the real challenges that we definitely see, and you just have to get right, is how do you look at those same things of data around that? How do you make sure that you don't accidentally, as a really basic example, you don't accidentally leak the financial reports that are stored somewhere in your knowledge base that realistically only a very small amount of people can see, don't get spread out to the others. And the kind of unsexy answer about all of this is it's kind of doing what we've done previously. It's looking at it and actually looking at the data, understand the classifications of it, understanding how that fits in, and kind of also understanding where that puts limitations into the system. We're increasingly seeing people with almost hybrid approaches when you look at the different ways of training these AIs. So they'll fine-tune some of it to almost that generic thing, depending on the data classification, and then they'll use a RAG on top of it for the more kind of granular, fine-grained control they want to be able to do everything. And I think that's just going to become increasingly key to all of our customers. And I think there's the privacy of the response. And then there's the other thing that is something that we've almost doubled down on, the privacy of your data. Understanding when you're interacting with these systems, what is happening to your data, what's happening to what you're being submitted. I think increasingly people want to know that. They want to understand the transparency of it. I think actually you look at some of the regulation, like the EU AI Act, I think is interesting, and not a topic for this discussion because it'd be a very lengthy one. I think there's pros and cons of what they've done, but fundamentally,
I'll make sure you get the invites to the AI Act webinar we do.
It's
definitely a long document.
It's one that I got to AI to summarize for me, if I'm honest, that I think definitely helped with it. I'm sure a lot of other people. I think one of the things around it, though, that does make sense is You have to understand as you're getting these assets into it, it's exactly the same as before. It's not new. If you were going to have a customer record that was sitting in a system, you would have security, you'd have life cycle, all of those things around it. And I think actually just now in this new world, it just makes all of that far more important, and also enables the business value to be driven out of it, because the more that you can understand how data is classified, what it does, where it should live, all of this stuff, that's what really helps drive the value through this.
I mean, I think there's some foundational items here, but I mean, as everybody's probably used, the Chat GPTs of this world, the Geminis, etc. That the power of those digital assistants, those digital twins, is incredible. I mean, it's the productivity. I was we've got the Praxis podcast, and I had Dan Sodergren on a few weeks ago. And he was saying, he posed the question, you can 10x your productivity. The challenge is then how do you reward that productivity? You pay the individuals 10 times more, or how do you reshape the future of the organization, which is a completely separate topic that's going down another rabbit hole. It's fascinating how these kind of things are coming to pass now.
I think that, and the thing that people need to understand with AI is today, it's the 1st of October 2024. This is the worst AI is ever going to be, ever within our lifetime. It is only getting better. You see the progress that's happening, and that kind of almost accelerated Moore's law scaling that's happening at the moment. And I just think fundamentally the thing that's going to drive all of that is going to be the data that sits underneath it. I think synthetic data is a really interesting thing. There's all kinds of interesting changes that have happened within it, but so much of that synthetic data is increasingly going to have underpinnings of well understood natural data that is being kind of unearthed from everything else.
Yeah, if I can sneak in a quick comment around privacy, as John mentioned, it really is stuff that we've been doing for a while in terms of just maintaining privacy, that we've been doing it just coming to the fore. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight, and also a plug for our company, is this notion of a complex object, right? So an analyst, a human being, would be able to see a bunch of data and know that if you have some data over there that's like transactional data that has IP address, and you have a customer list that has last names, if you combine those two, like suddenly you've de-anonymized this data, and now it's like PII, right? It's a big deal. So the problem that we face is this is not a simple thing that you can just do. And you need to do it at a very, very large scale. So you need to automate this, right? And this has to have a score, and this needs to be constantly refreshed because these regulatory regimes are constantly being updated, right? So, a lot of companies, maybe they're medium to small companies, they don't have the resources to constantly update and manage this stuff. But yet, small to medium-sized companies now use more and more data. Right. If you take the small to medium-sized insurance companies, their ability to analyze data is how they get their competitive advantage. They may not have the revenue or the management of capital that larger insurance carriers do, but they really, really need to leverage that data. So this is precisely the crossroads where we need to have, better curation, obviously, but through automation to do these higher level functions, not simple atomic tagging, but seeing all the possible combinations you can make, right? And that's part of the challenge. And I think John's right. This is the worst it's ever going to be, but we still need to get over the hump. We need to get from here to there, right? And show the value. And I think those that are able to understand this and solve this problem more quickly and more effectively will come out, as leaders, right? That's really the new challenge.
Actually, I mean, you've actually pre-answered one of my next questions, actually. So I was going to say, what innovations in data curation could actually help shape the future, and you just answered it. So you don't get another chance there, Andrew. That's your gone, Roberto.
That's my plug.
Any thoughts from you? Well, we'll go around the panel now for this final segue before we open the floor for some live Q&A from the.
I completely agree with what Andrew was saying. We've been chatting between us about what I love to be visualized as the mirror on the wall. So basically, if you roll forward 5-6 years or even less, maybe Andrew, what Praxis could do is really to tell me who I really am as a company, because that's the key to everything. I mean, if I know at any point in time in space what my data does, who's using it, for what reason, under what circumstances. And there's no regulation I can answer. There's no use case I can resolve. And literally, it's the essence of resilience, because I know where I stand. I know my risks. I know who I am. And it's a bit of a dream. But to John's point that we are the worst we will ever be, I think we have a chance to crack this problem.
That's a great idea. We should ship the software and obviously send a mirror to all our customers as well. What about that?
Look at yourself. You're gonna be today is the worst you're ever gonna be.
You're only gonna get younger.
Yeah, you can only get younger.
Keep using the cream. Yeah, keep using the cream. Maxwell, any thoughts about the future of this topic? What you seeing? I know we talked about the other week about this concept of dark data, which is still untapped as well. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on we are at a certain stage, but what's some kind of exciting things you see in the future that you think we could embrace?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm really excited about and have been tracking for a while is federated learning, right? So a quick primer for the audience. So that's basically where instead of bringing the data to the model, right, you basically bring the model to the data. Okay? And what that does is then you've got a bunch of data in different areas, different networks that, for example, can never ever leave that network. Okay, so in highly regulated and/or high security environments, that can be really helpful. Right, that can alleviate a lot of just sort of logistical challenges around. We've got to get sign off, right? To send it to this system or to move it off of this network and so on. So, yeah, federated and confidential, exactly. That's one of the things I'm really excited about. We've seen iterations of this over the years. I've worked with it for quite a long time. But now, of course, with the LLMs, with other kinds of decision systems that are coming online, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's gonna pop up.
So what you said is the rather original concept of either centralized or federated or distributed data. You're saying basically applying those principles to the models as well. So you've got a kind of a coupling.
Exactly.
Because also, you don't forget that the big challenge we're having is sovereignty. So sovereignty of data is going to be a big thing. Is a big thing. So that kind of federation could help when you don't want to have the data going out. We want to just have the outcome of the algorithm one stream, and it's a good definitely a good trend.
You just give me an idea for a really good meme now at the back of this webinar. Anyway, Mr. Hammond, could you just give us any thoughts from your side before we switch into the Q&A from the floor?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I think about the federated stuff. My views. I think it's really interesting when you start to think about how intelligence works at scale. I think fundamentally fractals are a beautiful part of nature. Nature is really good at inventing things which are just very efficient and very, very good at scaling. And it doesn't really invent them; it just discovers them, as weird as it sounds. And it's really interesting if you look at how nature has been optimized with it, so how intelligence has been optimized within nature. And really it's distributed centers of intelligence, whether you look at that within your cells, within your individual neurons. But then I think also it happens far larger at societal level. The most intelligent thing that we're aware of is human society. It's not any one piece within it. And I think similar things to that will probably happen in the evolution of neural networks. That I do think, I'm a massive non-believer in this kind of winner takes all LLM thing. I think that I think that'd be a really bad thing that happens, because it would just seem like a hideous dystopian future.
It does seem like a bit of a race, doesn't it, when you see all the announcements?
It does, but I think fundamentally where all of this is going is different LLMs trained with different amounts of data that are good at different things with interactions behind. And I think
it's like a best of breed approach, and you get like a collaboration. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so that's my point. But yeah, interesting stuff.
Cool. Thank you very much. Well, that was we covered quite a lot of ground in that panel discussion. Thank you for all that. I don't know, Anna, if you are there. Anna, can you hear me? Are you available on audio? Do I need to empower you? Just wonder if you've got any questions from the audience that you could see, any Q&A that's come through.
We've got, let's see. Here's a question. Why would a company use an open LLM like Llama versus a proprietary one like ChatGPT?
Who wants to take that from the panel? Who wants to go through the Scooby-Doo scenario again? Like John explained?
I can take that from a start. I mean, realistically, so I mean, there's a bigger question whether between open source LLMs and open weight LLMs, when you start to really dive down into it. So without going down that whole rabbit hole of what it exists, in terms of open weight LLMs like Llama and there's a whole bunch of others. The real advantage you have around it is your ability to fine tune those LLMs because of your ownership of it. You can start to fine tune it. You can ensure privacy happens within it. You can start to use highly quantized models of it that sit at the edge. I do think it's really interesting seeing the time and effort that is going into effectively open weighted LLMs. Where do we see them being used alternatively? Yeah, the reality is if you look at all of the benchmarks at the moment, the highest performing LLMs at the moment are closed. So if you look at either Claude or ChatGPT, or sorry, GPT-01, they're currently closed weight. I could argue both ways of where that's going to end up. I think some really interesting stuff. When you look at like the Falcon B models that are coming out, I think some really good open weight models. I think more than that, the ability, if you want a model which you fully control and is yours and you know where it is, you know what it's attached to, there is no substitute ever for being able to take that and either run it yourself or run it in your own environment like we do with Bedrock. And also just the customization that it gives in terms of that fine-tuning component.
Cool. Thank you for fielding that answer. Anna, any more questions we got from the floor that you can share?
Sure. Given the massive computation power needed to deliver Gen AI solutions, how to manage the price per prompt in a small to medium-sized company?
That's quite a difficult one. Who wants to pick that one up? Maxwell, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a couple of things that you can sort of jump to right away. One of them, John just mentioned, right, which is sort of quantized models, right, or reduced models, or pruned, right? Also, that tends to work.
You mean these kind of like small language models? You call them as SLMs, is it? Or?
SLMs, yeah. There's a new variety I was reading about. It's a little humorous. Tiny language models. Sort of fun. But no, I mean, by and large, you can take a lot of these, either something off the shelf, like Mistral was mentioned, or even something fine tuned, like John was talking about. But generally speaking, you can take something like that and either compress it, quantize it, or prune it, perhaps, or all the above, and really not sacrifice much. Usually single digits, low single digits in terms of accuracy overall. So that's a really, really good strategy to kind of reduce the burden. The other thing
is that like building like specific use case models? Then is that what you're kind of talking about there, or?
That was going to be my second point. Yeah, is really kind of look at, hey, do we need a 70 billion parameter, right? Do we need one of the mid-size, medium large size, or can we get away with a 7B, right? Or maybe even smaller, right? Can we specialize? And between those two levers, you can probably get to, if you're starting from a 70B, fairly large model, by the time you've kind of absolutely used those two levers, you can probably get down to 80x lower costs. Right? You can probably really bring that down.
So it makes it affordable and basically makes it accessible.
But can I plug one thing on this one, because I might should do my old guy voice. When I did my thesis in 1993, I did something on a 2 megabyte RAM laptop, right? So my point is back to what Maxwell was saying in general. I think there is a concept of talk about responsible AI. For me, responsible AI is not just being responsible with the intelligence in the system, but also frugal with what we need to use from a resources point of view to make this thing work. I think it's the data frugality, and I'm sure John, of course, you will be sensitive to this one, but everyone should be, because I mean, being efficient with our data means also being efficient with our world resources. Don't forget, data centers are using a lot of power and a lot of water. So I think as a group, as an industry, we need to really think about, it's good to have a 40 megabyte, 40 terabyte, whatever, but okay, how do we how we're going to be frugal about this?
And in our traditional GE thinking would be lean thinking. bit
Lean,
lean think,
yes.
bit, take the waste out. What do you really,
Yeah.
really need rather than
Exactly.
everything, rather than all the ice cream on top. So somebody was going to say something? Who was going to say?
So
Yeah.
one there's one thing so Amazon Bedrock, which is basically our platform that we run like LLMs. There's one feature that people haven't seen so much, which is I'll post a link to the chat, which is Amazon Bedrock Model Evaluator. I think that one of the things that people are missing as they start to go into, and it's not just us, and there's other people who are available and stuff like that. I'm not here to sell anything. There's all kinds of different model evaluators. As you're starting to build applications which use LLMs, whether they're the ones that are within your control or especially ones that you're getting from other companies, those will change. And that's completely different change to the paradigm of software testing, especially when you're in a situation where it's a non-deterministic response that's coming through. So it's proper interesting. The whole AI ops side is really, really interesting. And I think to a large extent, one thing, much to the fact that AI is the worst it is now, we know this time next year there'll be dramatically better and dramatically cheaper models. The trick to all of it is making sure you use something like Bedrock Model Evaluator. I think Launch Darkly do one as well. A few other companies are starting to do them. That effectively, I think OpenRouter does as well, if I remember rightly, that effectively automate where those prompts are going to. And that again comes into something where you can kind of tune those. We had it with so when Anthropic Claude was out for a while, you had Opus, Sonnet, and I forget the smallest one, the very smallest one. And the key to all of it is working out what size LLM you need for your data and getting it as small as you possibly can when you tune that kind of user response to the right thing. And that tuning is something, case surprise, that LLMs are really, really good at, ironically. So they're really good at that reflectivity of understanding the quality of the output that's going and whether it's better from one or how much worse it is from one. So I would thoroughly recommend tuning to different quantized models. Use something that's already built to do it, but there's huge savings behind that.
Well, that's a really good way to finish, actually, because it's thinking about how you architect it and also making sure you design it fit for purpose, and it's not just going big everywhere. How do you small, medium, large t-shirt sizing, all that kind of good stuff. So no, some great stuff there. Thank you. Right, okay, so I'm just going to flip back to the presentation where if I can find it. Okay, so where's my presentation? Right, so thank you for that very, very interactive and spicy, well, not too spicy, panel discussion and the live Q&A. Thanks for the questions from the floor. So just kicking off into the wrapping this session up, because we're now on the top of the hour. A bit about Praxi. As you probably, hopefully, if you've done a little bit of research before you joined today's session, we're all about data. As Andrew mentioned, we've been running the business for a number of years, and what we see as being, this concept of being focused and deep. So, there's a lot of people, if you're trying to buy solutions in this space, where you go, it's pointless trying to say we can do the whole value chain. So what we're trying to do is do very narrow but very deep and focused capability. And what we've done around that is obviously built some, what we say, foundational capabilities around discovery and profiling matching, but also we built these industry models, specific models, which we call as a library, which allows you then to really step change and get faster time to value in how you actually look at the whole piece of finding data, understanding it and curating it out of the box. And then what we've used is a foundational piece around automation, so you can get that stuff from day one. Obviously, that's kind of more and more important as organizations are trying to say, okay, how do we grab this nettle, this AI nettle, and how do we actually embrace it and get support these types of other initiatives? So, this diagram we've got on the left, the tree diagram we've got, all these other kind of, the things in the pink bubbles get the kind of maybe the visibility within the business case. But what, our hypothesis and our foundational premise is that automated expert data curation is a foundational item for that. And hopefully today's conversation has helped you to understand the relevance and the strategic nature of that. And then what we'd like to do is announce some exciting news. So, we have the, software as a service solutions out there. And what we'd like to do is open the floor and open the market to a new announcement today. And we're now making available in October this year on the Amazon Marketplace, AWS Marketplace, what we're calling CAS, Curation as a Service. So If you're on your mobile phone watching this video, if you or at your home, you can obviously scan this QR code, and this is the long form link here, and we'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in signing up for, we're going to be launching this in October. We're going to be releasing it as a free tier launch offer, and join our release cohort. We're going to then do a number of things around that. So we're going to do office hours. We're going to do build a community around that as well, so people can learn around how to the best practice around that. We've got some great speakers that are going to be part of that community. So yeah, we'd love you to join the journey, and announcing that today on today's webinar. And thanks for all the support from AWS to get us there. And just finishing off in terms of connecting with the people we've got on the panel today. These are all the people's LinkedIn links here, so I'm sure people will be very interested in catching up with people that have attended today's webinar. If you're watching this on YouTube, obviously afterwards, the same thing should apply. You should be able to sign up for the cohort or connect to any of the speakers we've got on here today. So a bit of information about Praxi. If you want to get hold of Praxi, usual ways of getting through the World Wide Web. I think that's quite popular these days. And obviously you can use the good old phone calls as well if you want, or obviously something like LinkedIn and email. And all I can say is, just to finish off, is thank you very much for attending today's session. Thank you for the panel. Thank you for Roberto. Thank you for John. Thank you for Maxwell. Thank you for Andrew. That was Andrew Turner, host of the Praxi Pod. More episodes coming up with that. And look forward to doing future webinars with our esteemed panel and other panel members into the future. That's the end of today's session, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.